questions. What about your memories of Donkey Kong? So, like, come out in 1981. We're obviously both not as old as that. So, what are your memories of it?
So, my first encounter with Donkey Kong would have been through the Atari 2600 version, which my dad had for that. It's not historically considered to be one of the better conversions, but I always had a real soft spot for it, because even without like half of the levels and with the graphical quality severely reduced, there was something special about it. It was, compared to a lot of the other stuff that I played on there, it still felt like one of the more modern platform games.
Oh, that's excellent. So what about other ports as well? Is there any other particular ports you remember over that one, or any others you played?
I got ColecoVision some time ago, and that's got a really good conversion for the time. Like, you can see why they bundled that and why it was such a big deal, because it looked so much more like the arcade game than what was on the other systems. And I also love the Game Boy version from 1994, which sort of expands it beyond being just a straight port of the arcade game, goes into a whole completely different thing. And that's one of the things that I like about Donkey Kong. Nintendo has always been interested in experimenting with Donkey Kong. I mean, you mentioned Donkey Kong Country, like that. as a committed Sega fan as a kid, that was a game where I played it on my cousin's SNES and felt like I was cheating, but also like I had to see this thing because it looked so good, right? It was one of those first times where I can remember seeing something and thinking, wow, I didn't know that console could do that. So the big thing for me with when you compare the games of the 70s and you compare the games of the early 80s, one of the big things that comes about is the introduction of characters. If you look at games of the 70s, most of them don't have characters. You play as a spaceship, you play as a racing car. Pac-Man was sort of really the first one that you had identifiable characters and sort of that cartoon look. And Donkey Kong was another very, very important game in that wave. Like, you had a cartoon villain who was appealing in his own right, and then you had this funny little guy that chased after him, and obviously now we know him as Mario. But even just compared to the characters of a few years prior, a world away in terms of animation and characterization. So that to me is one of the big things. I think that's why people latched onto it, because Donkey Kong was hard. And it is hard. It's the kind of game that I think people would get turned off of quite easily if there wasn't that appealing thing of the monkey taunting you to, get to the top of the girders.
Yeah.
With the way that Mario Jumpman controls in that game, it's interesting because there's precision to it and there's a rhythm to it. Once you get going over those barrels in the first stage, it's satisfying to clear one. When you realize you can do two at once, that's really awesome. Because Pac-Man, where everything sort of runs in such a heavily defined way, you can do that perfect game. You can learn how every move affects what the ghosts will do and things. And with Donkey Kong, there's just a bit more randomness to it, and a bit more. There's a sense that players can milk more points out of this, and there's no such thing as the perfect game. And people didn't think they'd break 1 million points, let alone the scores we see today. It's a very appealing game in that regard as well. And, just because of the personalities involved as well. I mean, say what you like about Billy Mitchell. I think if you asked him, he would consider himself something akin to a wrestling heel, right? Sort of, someone who plays up being a villain. Like, it's interesting because you hear about people who play Donkey Kong. Like, supposedly Eminem is very good at it. I can't remember where I heard that, but it's something that's lodged in my mind. There was a little while where I was following the back and forth between Robbie Lakeman and the Wes Copeland.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, watching them trade high scores back and forth, and like again, Wes Copeland is so much younger than the game he's playing. It just shows the enduring appeal of that in a competitive sense.
Oh yeah, it definitely does. Just I suppose just one last thing to finish on. What about like the sort of some of the controversy? Like it was one of the first times where video games had found itself wrapped up in some problems with like Hollywood and that, didn't it? Like with the names and everything. What about that? Do you think that's like a? I think what I'm trying to ask is like, what sort of influence do you think that Donkey Kong's had on like our popular culture today?
Massive. Like there's someone that I disagree with a lot on Discord, who was trying to say that Donkey Kong is a B tier Nintendo franchise. Yeah, and I was like, okay. I said, you know, you're a fan of Seth MacFarlane's stuff, which they are. And they said, yeah. And because they were trying to group it in the same sort of bracket as Pikmin. And I just said, so you've seen the bit in Family Guy where Mario and Donkey Kong mess up and end up sealing Princess in the barrel and chucking her off the cliff. Yeah. And you've seen the bit in American Dad where Roger does some Donkey Kong things to get up to the moonshine guy. Yeah. Now think how many times you've seen Pikmin referenced in anything ever. So, but it's like beyond you know parodies and pastiche. It's been a huge influence on a couple of things. Like there are a couple of big court cases to do with it. So obviously you had the one regarding the similarities to King Kong, which was interesting because the way that ended was that the film company had successfully proven in a previous case that King Kong was public domain and therefore not copyrightable. So Nintendo got away with that one.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. I think it is like you mentioned earlier in this interview, like it's just like an enduring legacy almost that Donkey Kong has, and it's kind of like instilled itself in the history of video games. Like, you know, how would you sum up, like if you had to describe Donkey Kong in like one sentence, how would you do it?
Donkey Kong's one of gaming's oldest celebrities. I think that's the way to do it. You know, he's so versatile. You know, he's a villain, he's a hero. He shows up in everything, and he's always good value when he does.
So Donkey Kong is 40 years old. Big shout out for Nick for the interview. Very insightful as always. But what about you guys? Let me know in the comments what you think. What's your favourite entry in the series? What are your memories? What's your favourite port? Thanks a lot.